If in the future you want a therapist who can actually think about psychology, or a doctor who can actually think about medicine, or a lawyer who can actually think about the law, then the new American Psychological Association's AI policies should make you concerned. Maybe they should even make you angry. As many who have been to college already know, the APA standards for academic integrity and the citing of sources is the prevailing standard at most institutions. When students write papers or conduct any research, it's typically the APA standards that they are expected to follow. Yet the APA's new so-called standards for generative AI use in classes just took a problematic, if not catastrophic turn. The APA has just licensed researchers, faculty, and even students to have AI, quote, analyze, refine, format, or visualize data for them instead of doing it for themselves, provided, of course, that they just disclose, quote, the tool used and the number of iterations of outputs. Similarly, the APA has just welcomed students to have AI, quote, write or draft manuscript content for them, provided that they just disclose, quote, the prompts and the tools used. The irony of this new policy, put forth by the leading organization for psychology, is palpable. Of all the organizations that set standards for how students should use their brains, you might think that the American Psychological Association would want to hold the line in favor of actual thinking skills. You might think that with all of the emerging research on AI's negative consequences for the brain, including the recent MIT study that showed arrested brain development for students using AI to write, which you can learn more about on my recent podcast, that the APA would adopt a vanguard position against replacing critical thinking with AI. You might think that the APA would want to bolster actual intelligence, independent thought, evidence-based reasoning, and so forth. But instead of supporting those integral aspects of healthy brain and skill development, the APA just took a big step in the opposite direction. If you're watching this, then I know you think actual intelligence and critical thinking is very important. So I know that you'll like, follow, and subscribe, but please also do me the favor of sharing this on your social media with other like-minded people who might also think that the degradation of actual intelligence and critical thinking is just a little problematic. The APA's new direction says it's perfectly okay if students don't analyze their own data, find their own sources, write their own papers, create their own research designs, or effectively do any thinking of their own. The only thing that's not okay is if they don't disclose that they didn't do any of those things and AI did it for them. In short, the leading and most common vanguard for the integrity of individual intellectual work just undermined the fundamental premise of education itself. What the APA could have done and should have done instead was to take a Gibraltarian stand against students using AI in place of their own thinking and independent thought. That is what it has done until this point. Students were and are simply not permitted to have a friend draft an essay for them. They were and are not, in many circles, permitted to allow a friend to proofread their work unless the syllabus licensed them to do so. But for some reason, if it's an AI drafting the paper instead of a friend, the APA now considers it permissible. Consistent with its history of guarding academic standards, the APA could and should have said that students who have an AI analyze data or write or draft manuscript content were not using their own intellect and are therefore cheating. Period. Doing so would have sent a strong message across all of academia that promoting students to use generative artificial intelligence instead of their actual intelligence was a violation of academic integrity, not to mention a gross violation of the most fundamental premise of education itself, the development of the student's mind. This move by the APA is particularly troubling, especially given a recent survey in Inside Higher Ed that 2/3 of students who use AI report that it is hurting their ability to think. To be fair, not all usages of AI referenced by the APA's new standards are cheating or circumventing important cognitive work. Furthermore, and more importantly, the APA's policies are, of course, not binding. Educators, departments, and/or institutions need not follow suit. Any given educator can still restrict AI usage and determine their own standards for what is acceptable in any given course, including the establishment of policies that would treat using AI to analyze data as cheating, which it should be. Even though the APA still asserts that, quote, AI cannot be named as an author on an APA scholarly publication, that seems nothing if not schizophrenic. After all, if a student uses AI to find its resources, analyze their data, and write their manuscript, then why shouldn't the AI be listed as an author, if not the lead author? What, after all, is the student really contributing anyway? Thus, as the arguable leading force for what constitutes academic integrity versus cheating, as well as for research on cognitive development and intelligence, the APA's move at least implicitly licenses students across academia to use generative AI in ways that will undermine their individual work, their critical thinking, and their overall actual intelligence. Once again, and I need to emphasize this because it is so incredible, the APA just told students everywhere that using AI to, quote, write or draft manuscript content for them, instead of thinking about it for themselves and developing their own ideas and referencing sources for themselves, perhaps even reading sources for themselves, and so on, is perfectly okay, as long as they cite the fact that they did it. And while it remains true that faculty can do as they wish with respect to policies about AI in their own classrooms, imagine being that high school, college, or graduate school educator who has to stand against the APA. Imagine having to hold the line against what will be mounting droves of students who ask, why can't we use AI in your class when we use it in so many of our other classes? And who ask, why can't we use AI in your class when the American Psychological Association says it's fine? Considering that educators maintaining stricter AI policies are already seeing students unenroll from their courses, the new APA standards may prove absolutely catastrophic to educators trying to promote critical thinking skills. So that returns us to the emerging problem. If you think that academic institutions should graduate students who can think critically about their subject of expertise, if you want a doctor who can think about medical things, in other words, then the APA just told you that you might be out of luck.